Yes, Todd? What?
Are we having class today?
We are when I say so.
Yes, sir.
Are you watching the clock that close? I want everyone to get their coffee and find their seats. Morning, Bev.
Good morning.
There you go. There you go.
Can I steal one of these? You guys good? If you don't mind. I didn't print enough. Maybe. I'll bring it back if I don't. Here you go, Bev. Good morning, everybody. Is anybody missing a sheet in front of them? You can't, am I not? I have a few extras if anybody needs one. Test. Okay. Okay, you have both of those. Yep. All right, good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a real quick announcement. Next week, we won't be having class, given that it's Labor Day weekend. So we won't have class, but the room's still here. So I'm going to take a quick raise of hand poll. Who would come and engage in some fellowship if we still got, half the number of donuts and still made coffee and the room was still ours to come and enjoy together? Who would like to come and be here for something like that? They do have Sunday school, I believe. Yes. Good. Okay, then we'll be there. Okay? All right. Let's start with a word of prayer then. Father, we praise and thank you again for another day to come and be together. We're grateful for this place where we can have some spiritual family where we can enjoy fellowship together. We can gather around your word. We can worship together. We ask that during times like this, when we're trying to dig into your word and learn more about who you are and who we are and what that means for our lives, that you would guide us. This is the word of God, but you are the God of this word, and so we need you. Be with us this morning and the weeks to follow as we continue in this new study. Continue to pray. Amen. All right, so if you haven't been here the last several weeks or ever, if this is your first time here, welcome, first of all. Glad you're here with us. We just finished up a series on the book of Acts. We spent 9 months, I think, about walking through Acts week by week. I felt like that was a rich blessing to me to listen to Pastor Schnocky teach his way through that and get to jump in on that periodically. One of the main characters as if it's fiction, one of the main people that we read of in Acts is Paul, or Saul, also author of about 2/3 of the books in our New Testament. And so as we get to read through Acts about some of the places and things that he did, we felt that it was maybe appropriate for our next study to look into his life a little deeper and how that then affects his theology. So for the next anywhere from, let's call it 10 to 12 weeks, we're going to be studying the life and theology of Paul. Okay? So we'll be jumping around several texts. We'll be in Acts here and there, but also in his epistles. But where I want to start is just to kind of give us a framework of how we're looking at this. Paul is a man who lived 2,000 years ago, spoke a different language than we speak, lived on the other side of the world from where we live. To just open up the Bible and read the words he wrote, which have already been translated once, it's a challenge to truly understand the depth of meaning. Sometimes it's very straightforward and crisp and clear, and sometimes, as we found in Acts, and we can find in all of his letters, it's a real challenge to figure out what exactly does this mean about God, about us, and how we live our lives. So, we're going to look at this, hopefully, through two different lenses. Two different schools of academics, we'll call it. History and theology. With history, oftentimes we look back at the people and the places and the events in history, and we have a tendency to try to decipher their aims or their intents. We look back at what happened and what were they doing and why did they do it. And then when we want to study theology, what we're looking about is what did they believe, which has a lot to do with their aims and their intents. And so history and theology are difficult to separate if we're going to look at this in an honest kind of way. Now, we do it all the time. We'll pick up the Bible and we read it, and God's Word does not return empty. It's a blessing to do that. But in a space like this, it's a good thing that we get to sit down and kind of dig a little bit deeper. So we want to look at who exactly was Saul of Tarsus. So we're going to start at the beginning, so we're going to call him Saul. Who was Saul of Tarsus, and why was he so mad? Those are the two things we're going to look at this morning. Who was he, and why was he so zealous and angry towards the early church? Okay? First, I did on your sheet there, I put two things in. I think it's interesting to look at Paul. The amount of influence over even us today, as Christians certainly, but even in just Western culture, the kind of influence, the wake that he created for people like us to experience life. First of all, the people that are in his wake. St. Augustine, in the 3rd and 4th century, attributes his conversion to the faith to Paul's writings in Rome. There's a verse in Romans chapter 13. It's a pretty simple verse. It's basically just saying, clean it up. Don't be so sinful, essentially, is what the verse says. But that struck a chord in a man who was highly intellectual, but very wayward in his behavior. And the writings of Paul shifted the course of his life, and he becomes one of the earliest saints of the church that had massive influence. The most influence over one particular person, a guy named Martin Luther. Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk. So Augustine was kind of his chief main historical influence. But he also attributes his real conversion, his really seeing Jesus for who he is and what he did from Romans chapter 1, from Paul's writing. John Wesley, we not often quoted, but we sing a lot of his hymns, attributes his conversion to reading Luther's commentary on Paul's letter on Rome. So, thousands of years later, he still has direct influence on the beliefs and lives of people today. Also, theological concepts. Has anybody heard the word justification? Sanctification? Glorification? Has anybody ever heard somebody talk about becoming a Christian as adoption? We wouldn't use these words if it wasn't for Paul and his writings. So the influence that this man has over the way that we look at Scripture, the way we look at our Jesus, the way we practice our faith in the church, can largely be attributed to God's work through this man, Paul. Okay. Let's look at him then. Who is Saul of Tarsus, and why is he so mad? On your sheet, I'm going to kind of just walk through that outline because I think there's too much historical content for us to wade through all of the details. But what I want to do is first just walk through who was he, what are some things that help us understand who this guy was, and then kind of go back through it and go, here's why he was so angry. Okay, so we'll start. At his point in history, it was the collision of three different worlds. So the nation of Israel had been through ebbs and flows of exile and back into their promised land several times. You had the Persians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. You have all these different world powers who had oppressed them. And then it comes to a point where it was the Hellenistic era. It was Alexander the Great begins to conquer many of these regions. And you'll see this Greek influence that just kind of floods all of these areas. So there's Jews that are living all around the Israel, the Palestinian area, the grander Mid-East, even up into Europe. You have all these Jews living there. And then Alexander the Great's conquests permeate this Greek influence. So a lot of high thinking, a lot of philosophy, not so much of the traditions of Israel. And they have to operate within this, which isn't new to them because they've already done it in Babylon and in Persia and these different places. Okay? Then we have the Maccabees. So there's this war. There's some zealous Jews that attempt to take back their culture and their land, and they'll call that the Hasmonean era. And then comes Rome. Okay, so now you have Roman influence, Greek influence, and Jewish influence, all in this soup, oftentimes kind of indecipherable. Even in places like the temple, you'll see ancient artifacts and things where they'll say, here was the synagogue of the Hebrews, or synagogue of the Hellenists. So there's the synagogue. It's Jewish people worshiping there, but they were speaking Greek. They were living in a Greek town. It was difficult to decipher what of them was strictly Jewish, what things had they adopted. You could look at it. I don't know if this is a great example. I'm just coming up with it on the spot. But even here in America, there might be some towns, even around Nebraska, that say, hey, we're the Swedish capital of Nebraska, and we still have a church where we speak the language. There's churches here in Lincoln that still speak Latvian. There's an Evangelical Lutheran Church of Latvia here in town. They still conduct services in Latvian. Do they live life exactly how they might have lived it back where their grandparents lived in Latvia? Probably not. They're shopping in our grocery stores. They're speaking English out in the world. Life gets a little bit messy when all of this different cultural influence comes to play. So when we look at Saul of Tarsus, we have to keep that in mind, that he's living in a town that is infiltrated by Greek, Roman, and Jewish influence. Okay? So I kind of want to break those three up. First, Saul's Jewish side. If we go to Philippians 3, 5 through 7, that's a good place to start reading. Philippians chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. I'm going to start reading about halfway through verse 4. If anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, which that was the law. It's a very Jewish thing to do. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, and as to righteousness under the law, blameless. I'm going to stop there. So these are Paul's words describing himself. He calls himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. That's not just to say, hey, I'm Hebrew. That's to say, in this culture where there is Greek, Roman influence, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. When I worship, it's in Aramaic. When I go to the synagogue, it's a synagogue where Hebrew people do Hebrew things. We don't have, we're rejecting a lot of this Greek influence. Okay? So it's not just a run-over sentence for Paul. He's trying to communicate to these people, I was doing it as a Jew in a Greek area. Okay? So, like I had said earlier, there's synagogues where they were speaking Greek. So they were still living out their Jewish beliefs. They were still doing the things they ought to do, trying to uphold the law. But they were doing so in the context of the culture that they were living in. It says that he was schooled in Jerusalem and was part of a strict family upbringing. That's also part of Hebrew of Hebrews. He was a family of Pharisees. I don't know if I had that footnoted here. In one of his texts, he says that he is from a family of Pharisees. Not just he himself, but his lineage. He would have grown up in a home very strict to the law. Zero to 12 in a Pharisee's house. 12 till whenever, I don't know when Hebrew graduation is. He went to Jerusalem to study under, at the time, one of the highest rabbis, the teachers of the law at the time, Gamaliel. So very, very strict in his upbringing. So he is committed to the Jewish ways. In that same text, we see that he is from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, so there's pride there with the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, anybody remember who's the most famous person from the tribe of Benjamin, other than Benjamin? King Saul. What's Paul's name? Saul. Right? So there's some ancestral tribal pride here in the ways of his Jewish identity. Okay? The tribe of Benjamin, if you'll remember from the Old Testament, is very small. It's the smallest of them. And through all of the different wars and oppressions and exiles and things, Benjamin gets kind of absorbed into the south with Judah, almost forgotten. There's the tribe of Judah. We talk about that. The tribe of Benjamin gets a little bit forgotten in the whole scheme of that history. And so Paul is saying from the tribe of Benjamin is a nod to some kind of pride in his Jewish identity. There was a sect of them that they called themselves the sons of Benjamin, just so as not to forget what tribe it was they came from. So what of his worldview? So it's clear that he's living a strict Jewish life, and that's important to him. He takes pride in it. What does a Jewish worldview at the time look like? I think if I could sum it up in 2 words, I say it's temple and Torah. Temple and Torah. I think we talked about this a little bit last week. I'm going to go to Acts 5:33. That there for a moment. So temple and Torah, they believed that these were the 2 things that brought the grace of God and the presence of God to the Israelite people at the time. Where did God dwell with his people throughout the Old Testament? Tabernacle. He moved with them. And then eventually they build their temple. That's God's dwelling place with his people. It's where the divine interacts with the human. But now we're scattered throughout the whole world. What are we supposed to do about this? I can't get to the temple. I can't engage God. What's this look like? Well, it was the Torah. You carry God's word with you. You commit it to memory. You write it on the tablet of your heart. So if you're not in Jerusalem and you can't make your way there, you still interact with the divine through the Torah. So temple and Torah are these highly held, sacred elements to their worldview. There were 2 camps of Pharisees at the time. As Paul's coming through his education, there's 2 camps. There's the Hillel camp, and there's the Shammai camp. Paul, it's unknown what he was kind of raised thinking. It says he was raised pretty strictly, but we can't know if let's say his dad was a Pharisee, which is not an unlikely possibility, but we don't know what his home was like. But he goes to school to study under Gamaliel, who was a Hillel Pharisee. I want to read this text then. Acts 5:33. When they heard this, they were enraged and they wanted to kill them. But a Pharisee in the council, named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in honor by all the people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. And he said to them, "Men of Israel, take care what you are about to do with these men. For before these days, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census and drew away some people after him, he too perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of man, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God." So they took his advice. Can you still hear me? Okay, so what we see here is Gamaliel, teacher of the law, Paul's rabbi, is a Hillel Pharisee. He was a little bit looser with the law, a little bit more understanding. In this case, they're talking about new Christians who are spreading the gospel. And he's saying to the zealots of the Pharisee camp, let it be. Let it ride. We'll see how this plays out. If it's not true and it's a problem, he'll find his end and his followers will disperse. So kind of a laissez-faire view on opposition to the Jewish faith. Paul, however, yeah, Dwayne.
I would like to add a little footnote.
Please.
Not only is there law because it's from men,
Right. he recognizes if God's behind this, you might find yourself opposing God, so good luck. Right? Yeah, so I mean, a very honest assessment. But Gamaliel is an example of one viewpoint of these Pharisees who are a little bit more laid back. I don't want to say loose with the law. They were very strict with the law, but a little more understanding, less zealous, if you will. Then there's the Shammai camp, of which Saul eventually finds himself growing up into. So even though his teacher was of this more Hillel mind, Paul sees himself much more zealous. Yeah. Hillel is a proper name. So he was a teacher in a school. So Gamaliel is now kind of the head of this school of thought, this Hillel school. There's some that think that he could have possibly been a son or grandson. Some just think that Gamaliel is a successor of these ideas. Okay, that's okay. Sure, yep. Hit me with it when you get it. Yeah. Hillel? It's a proper name. I'm not sure exactly what the Jewish translation into other words, but yep, for Hillel. Yep. Yes, a person. Yep. Dwayne. Right. Yep. Correct. Yep. Yes. Okay, so we're trying to differentiate between two worldviews of Pharisees. You have one that's just more like Gamaliel. You have another who's much more zealous. When they encounter opposition to the Jewish faith, they're not so lenient. Violent even, to the point of, let's get our swords. Okay? Some examples, if I could. Let's say their teachings on Sabbath laws. You know, keep the Sabbath. Keep it holy. The Hillel camp of Pharisees might have a cascading list of other rules and concessions. Well, you can do this if you do it like this at this time of day, if you push this or that. It's opening the door for a little bit more lenient way of adhering to the same law. Whereas the Shammai camp would have said, no, this is what it says. We're not going to be lenient. This is how this goes. The divorce laws. In the Hillel camp, there would have been a long list of concessions as to what makes this okay and still abiding to the law. Whereas the Shammai camp would have said, no, this is what the law says. There's no loosening or no dynamics to this. This is what it says. We will follow it. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next point. Because Saul found himself, and we don't really know all the details as to why he ended up thinking this way, but we can kind of see how it might happen. A young person who grows up in a household that is extremely strict to the law, and then goes early on and excels among his classmates in his Pharisaical learnings, is well aware of the history of the Old Testament, how he becomes more of a zealot, how he becomes more in the Shammai camp. What would that look like? First of all, they believed that they were coming into a messianic age. When things don't look so good, the Lord comes to our aid. It's kind of the cycle. You know, we look back at it now, and it's more like, okay, God saves them, and then they screw up, and now they find themselves back into oppression. A lot of them would have looked at it as, oh, we're in oppression. God's going to come to save us. It's kind of flipping the perspective upside down on that a little bit. And so because there's a lot of challenges, they're severely oppressed by Rome. It's been a long time coming. it wouldn't have been unlikely that they would have thought, hey, the day is coming. When the Messiah comes and announces himself, they're ready for that. So they would see themselves in this messianic age. And him, being a zealot, he tells us that he is zealous for my Father's traditions. If we go to Galatians 1, let's read what he actually wrote. Galatians 1, verse 14. Well, let's start at 13. For you have heard my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my father. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my father. Why would he have been so zealous? First of all, if we look back to some of the traditions of Israel, some of the people that he would have looked up to as zealots. In Numbers 25, 1 through 8, we don't have to flip there and read it, but in Numbers 25, 1 through 8, we read of Phinehas. So at this time, the people of Israel were living in the same area as the people of Moab. Many Israelite men were taking Moabite wives. And what happens to Israel when they start intermarrying with these other nations in the Holy Land? They follow other gods. So this is what we're seeing here with the Moabite. Phinehas, so zealous for what God told them was good and right and true, and I will do everything in my power to keep Israel on the right side of God's law, drives a spear through a Hebrew man and his Moabite wife while they're lying in their tent. He views this, Paul looks back to this and says, look at how great Phinehas is. He loves the law so much. Look at the lengths he's willing to go to protect Israel from falling away from God's law, from the Torah. Where is God for me? The temple and the Torah. That's what we must protect at all costs. He also looks back to Elijah, 1 Kings 18. And this is a more familiar story than Phinehas's. But Elijah lures these prophets of Baal. Israel, once again, dabbling in the worship of other gods. What does Elijah do? He lures these prophets of Baal and destroys them. Violence against the opposition to God's law. Saul looks back to things like that and says, look at what's happening to Israel with this Greek influence, with this Roman influence, with these people claiming to be the Messiah and then becoming crucified. We're going to let that upend our temple and Torah over my dead body. I'm going to do everything I can possibly do. Paul might have been thinking of himself as a prophet of Israel, zealous to keep the traditions of his people. It's starting to get just a little bit clearer as to why someone would get so violent that we find with Paul. We read about it in Acts, the things that he was doing. Horrific. Okay, so Saul views himself, and I'm starting to use, forgive me, Saul and Paul interchangeably. I plan to say Saul all morning. It's a habit. He views himself as a successor of the zeal of these prophets. All right, so that's kind of his Jewish side. 1/3 of his cultural makeup. He grew up in a city called Tarsus. If on a map, you've got your Mediterranean Sea, it would have been just a little bit to the north and west of Israel, around the sea a little bit. It's a bay town. It's a big university town. So Alexander the Great took an affection for this city of Tarsus. It changed hands many times, so it's infiltrated with all of this different culture. It was seen as an academic town. One quote from a non-biblical scholar as he's looking at the town, he says it was avid in the pursuit of culture. So this is the kind of town that Saul is growing up in. He's a Hebrew of Hebrews, keeping very strict Hebrew stuff, but living in one of, if not the most culturally diverse cities. He would likely to have been fluent with Greek, Latin, due to his Roman background, Aramaic, Hebrew, lots of different languages. And then we have his Roman side. We talked about this quite a bit in Acts. His Roman side saved his life on several occasions. He was born with Roman citizenship, probably earned by a father, grandfather, or even further back. If he's from a family of Hebrews, from Pharisees, living in a town like Tarsus, how would they have gotten Roman citizenship? Two different ways you can do that. You can buy it for a heck of a lot of money, or you can prove yourself useful to the advancement of Rome. We don't know what that looked like, but somewhere in Paul's ancestry, recent, at least within probably 2 generations, just given the timeline of changing hands of world powers, would have been awarded with citizenship. I can only imagine that Paul was begrudgingly privileged with this. I have it, it's useful, but I am a Hebrew of Hebrews. I am opposed to the oppression of Rome. Nancy, you have a thought? Papers. Yep. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There may have been other things. Anything I've read has said that you get it. And actually, within 30 days of your birth, your father has to go register you as a citizen. And then you have papers. I don't know if you lose them, what you do. You got to go to Rome. You have to go to the Roman DMV. It's going to be $50. Right. Right. Sure. Right. Yep. And we can only imagine.
That's the same thing. I mean, this has been from the beginning of time that there's
Sure.
been the genealogy, the following.
Right. Yeah, and you can only imagine how, the coveted status of Roman citizenship, that was probably pretty tight. If you got caught with falsified papers, probably death. Yeah. Yep. Oh, Hebrew of Hebrews, growing up in the Greekest of cities with Roman citizenship. Yes, a lot afforded to him. Yeah, which also, again, speculation, forgive me, might play into the arrogance of the zealousness of his attitude. To say that I am a prophet of Israel, God has given me proxy to go and kill people that oppose temple and Torah. That's some hubris. Yeah. Okay. I put, on your sheet, did I put other facts? I'm not going to walk through all the other facts, but they're interesting, things of note. Some biblical, some extra biblical. Things about his physical appearance. We get a couple glimpses into that, which I think are interesting. We get more glimpses into his education through different texts. One thing I do is worthy of note, just for an understanding of Paul. Jewish teachers, so Greek teachers, Greek thinkers, to have a manual labor job was beneath you. That was not, I teach and people pay me for that. I'm up here. Jewish teachers, that would have hindered the teaching. That would have introduced a side motive to the content that you were teaching. So Jewish teachers often had an actual money-making endeavor of some kind. Paul, again, this is passed down. It's a family business. We've learned of this. He's a tent maker, a tanner of leathers and things. At the time, it was very in demand. You could do well with that. And again, Nancy, what you said, that just the perfect makeup of what we have here is also at that time a profession. You put your tools in your bag and you can travel to a new city, purchase your supplies, and continue to work. So to be a traveling missionary teacher with this profession was uniquely well set up. Yes. And I make note of his names there. Saul and Paul, it wasn't I think we talked about this in Acts. They're not two different names, it's one name, two languages. Yes, at his, I'm avoiding calling it his conversion because we're going to talk about that next week, and I want to use it. Years later, and we'll talk about that, to take the gospel to Gentile believers because of his background as Greek and Roman. When he does that, I'm not going to take my Jewish name over there. I'm going to say my name in Greek, which would be Paul. If my name was John and I was going to go be a missionary in Mexico full-time, only ever speak Spanish to these people and become like them so that I can take the good news to them. And I insisted that they call me John. I might let them call me Juan. Because it's a different language. So, interesting point to note. Okay, I want to go back through some of these things. Why was Saul so angry with Jesus and his followers? So we've talked about these things about who he is and why he is the way he is. What is it then about Jesus that would be so offensive? So if we go back and we talk about Jesus as Hebrew of Hebrews, from a family of Pharisees. He was schooled in Jerusalem, brought up with a strict upbringing, took pride in his tribe of Benjamin. Jesus enjoyed the company of sinners who to Saul were bringing on the heavy hand of God as punishment on Israel, delaying the triumph of Israel. He was strict and zealous. And so other Jews who are not so strict and zealous, who are in direct ways or in indirect ways not following God's law, not taking their time to the temple, not reading their Bibles, maybe engaging in gambling, not paying their taxes to the temple tax. He might have viewed those types of things as bringing on the wrath of God and delaying the inevitable triumph of Israel with the Messiah. So he's thinking, this Jesus guy is dining with these people. He's giving them preference. He's calling woe upon us who are keeping the law, and he's showing favor to those who are delaying the inevitable glory of Israel. Jesus cursed the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, and he welcomed the sinner Jews and the Gentiles to his table. So this would have been in direct combat to what Saul was on a mission to achieve, which was the glory of Israel. Then we talked about temple and Torah. We talked about the Hillel and the Shammai camps of thinking. So if you were a Jew and you were looking at Jesus as a Jewish rabbi, Jesus would have sounded a lot more like the Hillel camp. He would have been Hillelian. When he looks at, he's unfolding the laws of God and unpacking them for the people. He's even on Sabbath picking heads of grain or healing people. Or it seems as though he's fast and loose with the law. So somebody in Paul's camp, in the Shammai camp, would have been very against that. Yeah.
So if Paul was trained up under Gamaliel, I don't get, like, where did his radicalism...
Yeah.
I mean, like, he took a 180 from the teachings of the person that
Mm-hmm.
he, like, dedicated such a chunk of his training up.
Yeah.
Or if he came from that, why would he have gone to Gamaliel to be the one that he...
Yep. All good questions.
That's such a weird...
Yeah. There's a lot of that with Paul, where you go, there's some things that make sense, and there's some things that you just go, wow, I'm not quite sure. If he was raised up under the school of Gamaliel, what is it that radicalized him?
Why do you call it
Right.
radical? I'm struggling with this. I believe in Yahweh.
Uh-huh.
I am a Yahwehist, follower of God, follower of Yahweh. I'm zealous for His laws. I'm zealous for following Him. I think I feel like we're making Paul to be this, like a zealot.
He is.
And no, he's not zealot. He's not out.
Well, you're talking about the specific camp of zealots.
Right, right.
Right. He is zealous.
He's zealous. He's very zealous.
Yes.
But there's a camp of zealots who are just out killing. I think we've lost our reverence in some way for Yahweh and for His truth of His word.
Sure.
And following it by our lukewarmness, which Jesus called out. But Jesus also said, I am God.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why the Pharisees
Yep.
were so opposed to Jesus. I mean, granted,
Yeah, and we'll get...
all that he was doing, the sinners and stuff, but more than that, he was claiming to be God, which for them, the God that they were looking for, the return of the Messiah, was totally different. This was a Messiah that would conquer and return the state of Israel.
Sure.
to earthly glory.
Yes.
I guess
So how could a crucified Jesus do that?
right.
Right.
And I don't know. I feel more like Paul here in that I think today we're not looking at the laws of God and holding true to them.
Yeah.
And not to say I'm a Pharisee, not legalist, but we've thrown legalism almost out the window and we become this. We're all buddies.
There is no
we're all
law.
friends. We're all.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you do in life. Just come on in and get to know Jesus. He's God.
Yeah, I think I can see where you're coming from. And in that way we can understand Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to grasp that. Here's where I would inject the difference and say I'm comfortable using words like zealous for him. He was murdering. he was, so he's out to an extreme. There's plenty of other very strict Pharisees who are going, I don't like that. I think he's wrong. I'm backing it if there's a vote to crucify that Jesus man. Not traveling out into the diaspora to extradite Jews back to Jerusalem so that we can stone them to death. That's the radicalness of Saul at this point, that he even concedes in his letters to say, I was chief of sinners as a persecutor of the way. So I think there's two things to hold there. I don't think we point a finger at Saul and go, how dare he be that way? I think it's reasonable to understand that if he's someone who believes that he is a prophet of Israel, to do anything at all costs to keep temple and Torah, keep the glory of God and the favor of God on that nation. It kind of makes sense why he would be as zealous as he was. And to go, wow, the horrid death that he brought to people is something that is, it's going to inform the theology in later weeks. This is what that's, yep. So when we look at things like, how would Paul have understood grace?
But that's where we've got to do it, because we've got the Old Testament. You've got to reconcile it. You've got to reconcile what was happening in the Old Testament with some of the prophets and such, and then with the coming of Jesus, what that reconciling is.
Sure.
There's so many now who are just cutting off and saying New Testament only. No, there's an Old Testament of a true following of Yahweh and his commitment, and look at it from the beginning, and you're gonna squirm in your seat. There, Jesus taking all
Yep.
his word, and that's what we have to learn.
Yep. So part of Paul's error is missing Jesus in the Old Testament that he thought he knew like the back of his hand. Dwayne?
In respect to the question of when did Paul make that, or lack of a better word, more radical change? Okay, the old system saw that. The old is gonna
Do you have a leader guide back there? No, that's the next point, and that's good to address Karina's questions. So, one of the ways, so Jesus was actually accused of this, and they didn't have the testimony to put him to it. So he was then killed for blasphemy, self one with God. That's then what they killed him for. But they actually wanted to bring him on trial in the first place because he spoke against temple. Temple and Torah are the two. This is where God comes to us. This is the height of our spiritual, I'm avoiding the word religion. This is because it's not just a part of the Israelite life. Temple and Torah. You're speaking against temple. In Stephen's preaching, we learned this from extra biblical stuff. You're not going to see it in Acts, but he preaches against the temple. To just have a static temple in Jerusalem is problematic for our faith. Stephen was saying, I believe that the house of God ought to move. It ought to be nomadic. We have these people who never get to be in the temple. This is a problem that you're setting up in one place. So he's speaking against temple. So that's a possibility, is that it just got to a point where the anger built up to say, you're speaking against the very things that uphold our faith. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's touch on this just a little bit. Is life not better? Because of what they said or what they came from. So, right up to the time they killed Jesus. So, tell me about how important it is to kill a guy. What is that all about?
Well, a lot of the killing is done according to law. So if you look at the outside of war, probably the Roman law had a lot of things that would warrant death, and so and things that were contradictory to the religious people of Israel, and so there's a lot of lawful killing happening. Even with Saul, we know that he went to the chief priests to obtain permission to go out of Jerusalem to these places where they would extradite these people of the way back into. So Saul was going to Damascus to get them and bring them back, not to kill them there, because that would have been unlawful. But they would bring them back and stone them according to the law. Yeah. So I guess you're asking more about the sanctity of life, and today we view that so much differently. Now, there's certain sectors of our culture that you could argue is pretty horrific. So it's important to think about those things. In that day, would a normal citizen have been like, wow, our government is awful? It seems crazy to think that they wouldn't, but they might have been thinking, don't break the law. That was the punishment under the law. And so we look back and we go, wow, look at all this horrific killing. That must have been a barbaric time. To some extent, the way they were killing people, yeah. But it was a lawful state. Whether Rome, Greek, or even the temple had its law. In which case, Stephen? Stoning, I think, in the temple was the primary method. Yeah. Crucifixion was Rome's, oftentimes to non-Romans. Yeah. So there's various different ways for different people and different behaviors. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Oscar. Yes, Oscar points out the vanity of being a Pharisee. And over time, they wanted their robes long and they're praying on the street corners. They didn't love it when Jesus comes along with a rather large following, calling them a brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs. That could have incited some anger. But also, you have to think there's a lot of Pharisees that had an ear for Jesus. Think about somebody like Gamaliel, teacher of teachers, had heard this. Also, just a point of note, Paul was likely a contemporary of Jesus. At most 5 to 10 years younger. It's not unlikely that he would have heard Jesus teaching. I'm not making a case that he did or would have known him or anything like that. Because that doesn't tell us that. But it wouldn't be unlikely that Saul was intimately familiar with the ministry of Jesus. But that makes me think, you have somebody like Saul who hears Jesus, or at least the teachings, and then he hears people like Stephen, and you go, angry. I got to get after him at all costs. And then people like Gamaliel who go, you almost have to think that he had an ear for it. Like, maybe. To be that, I'm of high status, so I can't dive all in with that. And I'm not suggesting he was a converted believer, but there were Pharisees who were. So it's the world at the time. We'll end on that. The world at the time was very black and white, but fluid. The Jewish people were like, this is our culture. This is it. But they lived in this world where they were navigating Greek and Roman culture. Even Pharisees were saying, yes, this is the law of God. This is what we uphold. And I'm going to steal from the pot a little bit. Or it wasn't as black and white as it looks when we read into it today. Yes, Dan? Yep.
cowboy law. And I think we need to separate these, and as we progress through this, I understand this study, as we progress, we're going to see the answers to a lot of these questions.
I hope so.
And
We'll do our best.
Try to focus on where we are right now.
Yep. So, yes, I put some study questions just for the week, if you were interested and had the time. Just for a little extra reading and thoughtfulness about who Saul is. Can we understand who this person is and why he would have behaved the way he did? Next week, we won't have class. 2 weeks from now, we will start to look at this, for lack of a better word, conversion of Saul. Yes. And I like that point, Dan. Like yes, he's one singular human, so we'll see the benefit of his upbringing into his ministry. But the work of the Holy Spirit to make him new is rather striking. You're going to see a lot of differences from Saul to Paul, if we want to use that distinction. Yep. 1 second. We'll go Roseanne and then. Yep. I think it. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Yeah, Gil.
With Saul losing his eyesight, and also Saul, why are you persecuting me?
Mm-hmm.
That right there is, he was still referred to as Saul.
Right.
And that has quite an impact. And what, 3 days he was without sight?
Mm-hmm.
He had brain
Interesting.
cancer.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. And that's what 2 weeks from now, that's what we'll study, is kind of get into the conversion experience and maybe some of the years following. So that's where we'll go next. All right. Thank you, everybody.